It's good to see everyone tonight. You'll have to bear with me in the class tonight. Greg called me a few minutes after 5 today and said he wasn't feeling good and wanted to know if I could teach class for him. So I had practically no preparation to teach class tonight. So whatever good, insightful comments y'all have tonight would be most appreciated. He said we'd be starting in Colossians Chapter 1 and verse 10, in that neighborhood. I thought we'd back up and look at verse 9 a little bit again, because I think it would be really helpful to our understanding as we read forward. So I'll read some. For this reason we also, since the day we heard it, do not cease to pray for you and to ask that you may be filled with the knowledge of His will and all wisdom and spiritual understanding, that you may walk worthy of the Lord, fully pleasing Him, being fruitful in every good work and increasing in the knowledge of God, strengthened with all might according to His glorious power, for all patience and long suffering with joy. So as we read that, as we was talking about verse 9 at the end of class last week, we talked about the knowledge of His will, how we need to study in order to get that. God's not just going to stick knowledge in our heads. The days of inspiration are over. All the inspiration that we're going to have is what was inspired to be written here in the Bible. So we're not going to get inspired knowledge. We can pray for wisdom, and He'll give us that. He'll help us with that. And then with spiritual understanding, I think the knowledge and the wisdom put together is how we get spiritual understanding. We're talking about spiritual things. And then he goes on to talk about the reason we need this knowledge and wisdom and spiritual understanding. He said that you may walk worthy of the Lord, fully pleasing Him. You know, as I thought about that, as I was reading through this tonight, I thought about that phrase, fully pleasing Him. You know, we've got to have a walk. We've got to walk worthy of the Lord, and that walk isn't just our steps down the street or whatever, but it's talking about our manner of life. We've got to be living in a way that says here is worthy of the Lord. Now, when we think about it, one way of looking at it, we're never going to be worthy of the Lord. We are sinners. We've all sinned and fallen short of the glory of God, so we're not worthy in that way of looking at it of the Lord. But what he's talking about, our walk, the way we live our life, should be after the pattern God's given us. We should be living in such a way that people can see Christ in us. And one of the things, as I read this and thought about tonight, it's talking about being fruitful in every good work. You know, sometimes we go places and we do things. Maybe we have a meal. We go out somewhere and we eat and we have the meal, and somebody says, well, how was your supper? And you say, well, it was pretty good overall, but there was probably something about it that didn't quite please us. And so when he's talking about being in every good work here, fully pleasing Him, being fruitful in every good work, he's not talking about us just being generally good most of the time or pretty good sometimes or something like that. As he talked about our walk, being worthy in our walk and being fruitful in every good work, we're supposed to be living godly, righteous lives all the time. Not just when we come here to worship, not just when we're around people that would call us out on not doing right, but we're supposed to be living good all the time. We're supposed to be doing these good works, every good work it says here, all the time. That's supposed to be our manner of life. And so we've got to examine ourselves, and if that's not how we're living, if we're not behaving ourselves like we ought to all the time, then we need to be making corrections in our life, because we're not measuring up to what the Scripture here tells us we're supposed to be doing. That needs to be our manner of our life. I can't talk tonight. That needs to be our manner of life. It says our walking worthy of the Lord, fully pleasing Him. We've got to be fully pleasing Him. Not just, well, pretty good overall or pretty good sometimes or part-time or most of the time. But our goal is to be pleasing to God all the time. It says fully pleasing Him. Not just partly pleasing Him, but fully pleasing Him. And it says increasing in the knowledge of God. So as we think about this growing in the knowledge that we're trying to grow and the wisdom and the spiritual understanding, the purpose of it is so that we can walk worthy of the Lord and fully please Him in every good work. It says increasing in the knowledge of God. As we talked about knowledge last week, we're not going to get knowledge. Somebody's not just going to open the lid on our skull and pour knowledge into our brain, shut it up, and then all of a sudden we know a bunch of stuff. But we're going to get knowledge by studying and reading God's Word. It's not going to come any other way. By meditating on it, by focusing on it, by applying ourselves to learning it. You know, I remember back about 3,000 years ago when I was in high school, my senior year, I took physics. And I actually slept through physics class and passed it. but I didn't make very good grades because I wasn't applying myself to gaining that knowledge that I needed to pass that class and do well. And so when we're talking about gaining knowledge here and growing in this knowledge and working at it, if we're just sleeping our way along through it, we're not going to do too well as Christians. We're not going to gain the knowledge we need. And without knowledge, we're not going to know how to be pleasing to God, and we're not going to know what these good works even are without knowledge. So we're going to have to be applying ourselves to gaining that knowledge, which means we're going to have to be reading the Bible. We're going to have to be, and not just reading it just so I can say I got through it, but I'm going to have to be reading it with the purpose of understanding it. Joel?
I was forwarded a podcast from a Baptist preacher that was given a dialogue by a co-worker who wants to talk some things about spiritual things, and they were saying that the Church of Christ are notorious for tying our salvation, tying our service to God by works in the way and the things that we do. And they said there's nothing that we can do that's required as part of our salvation. But when we look at texts like Colossians, it's very clear that the faithful obedience is required to be pleasing to God, to be fruitful, to walk worthily, so it's impossible for us to say, I believe in God, without saying that also mandates it upon me that I must obediently follow God. As I read this verse, this tells us there's a way that we're supposed to act. There are things that we're supposed to do to be pleasing to God. And we can't separate the two. I can't just say, well, I believe in God, and because of that belief I'm saved, and nothing is required of me. It's very clear, as we read all throughout the New Testament, that an obedient faith is what's required. And to separate those two, I think, is a clear violation of almost every passage that we read in the New Testament. But this verse is just another one. That because of our faith, because of that we are believing God and are obedient to Him, that filled with knowledge, it says that we should walk worthily of the Lord and all pleasing, being fruitful in every good work. It's not a works-based salvation. You're not going to work hard enough and God's going to say in the day of judgment, well, I am saving you because you've done so many good works. But on the day of judgment, you sure hope to hear God say, you're a good, faithful servant who's lived an obedient life, who's done fruitful works in service because of your obedience and your belief. Enter in, now good, faithful servant.
Yeah, that's our goal, is to hear God say, enter, faithful servant. That's what we want to hear. But we're not going to hear that if we haven't done the works that's required of us. And as Joel said, we can't do enough works to earn our salvation. The first time we ever sinned, we disqualified ourselves from salvation. And because what we actually owed God was completely sinless life. And so when I done that first sin, if I ever in my whole life only sinned one time, and I haven't done nearly that good, but if that's the only time I'd ever sinned and had lived a perfect life after that, I haven't made up for the one sin, because what I owed God was a sinless life. So that's why Jesus, as we're going to talk about as we go through the lesson tonight, that's why He had to come to this earth. That's why He had to be our sacrifice, because we couldn't fix our problem with sin. We couldn't take care of it. We had to have help with that. Wade?
So I'm kind of going off the back of what Joel was saying, but you think about what he's saying here. He's saying that we have to participate. We have to do something, because how am I supposed to, in verse 10, it says, increasing in the knowledge of God. How am I supposed to increase in the knowledge of God if I just sit back and just say, y'all got it, God's got it, I'm a Christian now, I'm good. I don't increase in the knowledge of God. I actually have to do something to increase in the knowledge of God. I've got to study my Bible. I've got to read my Bible. I've got to take opportunities as they come. So when a Bible study comes up on Sunday night here at College View, I'm here. When it's on Sunday morning, I'm here. When the doors are open, I'm here. When other places are doing Bible studies, I'm there. That helps me to grow. Every time I'm exposed, it helps me to grow. But if I don't, if I just sit back and just say, I believe I'm good, I can't grow.
There's a lot of people that I talk to from time to time, they've got that attitude, I believe I'm okay. Because I believe in Jesus, I'm okay. I don't have to do anything. One fellow told me, Jesus done all the work. There's no work I can do or have to do. Jesus done all the work. And if I try to say I've got to do any works, then I'm being demeaning toward Jesus and what He did. Well, Jesus said there was works to do. I mean, as we've been talking, we read all through the New Testament, there was works to do. We read in the Old Testament, in the law of Moses, there was works they had to do.
Jesus said belief's a work.
That's true. Jesus said that belief is a work that God ordained. And so to say, well, I don't have to do anything, if you say I don't have to do any work to be saved, that means everybody's going to be saved. Because if belief is a work and I don't have to do any work, then obviously everybody's going to be saved, nobody's going to hell. And the Bible clearly doesn't support that idea. John?
Ephesians 4:17 says, now this is saying, and testify in the Lord, you must no longer walk as the Gentiles do in the futility of their minds. They're darkened in their understanding, alienated from the life of God because of the ignorance that is in them due to their hardness of heart. But we're supposed to be walking, we're supposed to be pleasing God. We need to be not doing what we did before we were saved. You can't go on living that life. If you've been saved, you cannot go on living that life because then you're not pleasing. You cut yourself off.
And we've got to change. Our life has to be lived. Our walk has to be, it says here, worthy of the Lord, fully pleasing Him. And in 2 places it says here, in verse 9 it talks about knowledge. And in verse 10 it talks about increasing in the knowledge of God. And as we think about that knowledge, see if I can remember what I want to try to say. A lot of people think that they're okay and they're right with God because of some feeling that they have. I feel like I'm right with God. I feel like I've been saved and things like this. This is telling us we've got to have knowledge, that our walk in being right with God is going to be based according to knowledge, not feelings. There's an intellectual process we have to go through to understand what we're supposed to do to be right with God. He's telling us here we've got to study. We've got to know it. We've got to apply our minds to it. It's not a feeling thing. Now, we should have a feeling, a strong feeling toward God. I mean, it's not that we're totally devoid of emotion or anything like that. But our salvation is not based on feelings here. He's saying to be right with God, we've got to have knowledge. He says we've got to be filled with knowledge. We've got to increase in knowledge. We might have learned enough about the Bible to understand what the plan of salvation is and have done what God asked us to do to be saved. But here he's saying we've got to be increasing in knowledge. So it's not like, okay, I've got this. I've went through the curriculum. I've understood the material. And I've got knowledge, I'm okay. He says, no, we got to be growing in knowledge. Our knowledge about God, about Jesus, about His plan, about what He has to do has got to be constantly increasing. Because if we're not increasing, if we're not growing, we're dying. There's no in between. Wait.
So 1 Peter 2, verse 2 says, like newborn babies, long for the pure milk of the Word, so that by it you may grow in respect to salvation. Mm-hmm. We're growing for salvation.
Yeah. All right, if we're growing, it says growing in respect or in relationship, to salvation. If we're not growing, we're not being saved. We've quit. We've ceased to become qualified for salvation, you might say. And so we've got to be. This growing in this knowledge is really important. If our knowledge about God is not increasing, if our understanding is not increasing, if we can't look back and say, as we mentioned a week or two ago in some of our sermons right at the New Year, if we can't look back and say I'm stronger as a Christian now than I was last year, then we've got a problem and we need to be fixing that. If we can't look back and say I believe I've learned things over the last year that I didn't know the year before, we've got a problem. We need to be working on that because this says we're supposed to be increasing in knowledge. Not that we're going to get it all and we're good, but we've got to have knowledge and then we've got to increase in knowledge. And so that's the direction we need to go. And that's part of our walking worthy of the Lord. If our knowledge isn't increasing, we're not walking worthy of the Lord. We're not fully pleasing Him in every good work if our knowledge isn't increasing. So we need to really stop and consider that and really examine ourselves to see, are we doing what we're supposed to be doing? Are we pleasing God in every way? It might be that we show up for every service of the church. As Wade mentioned, I show up for every service of the church. If something ain't drastically wrong, we're here for every service. Well, that might be. But it might be I don't do other things I should be doing. So if I'm not being pleasing in every good work, then I'm not, it says fully pleasing Him. It's just, don't say make Him happy most of the time. It says be fully pleasing to Him. So we've got to keep growing. Now, I don't necessarily know that I can ever be fully pleasing to Him 100% perfect. I know I can't be 100% perfect, but I need to be working toward it. I need to be increasing in that work. I need to be getting better. Because if we're not growing, we're dying. And he's telling us here we've got to be growing. We've got to be increasing. We've got to be fruitful in every good work. And he goes on, talked about being strengthened with all might according to his glorious power for all patience and long suffering with joy. So part of this knowledge that we're going to be getting, this working, this being fruitful, is causing us to be strengthened here, it says, with all might according to his glorious power. So it's not that we're going to strengthen ourselves, but as we learn more and do more, it's just a continuing process. It makes us better all the time. And by doing that, that's the way God has devised that we're going to be strengthened. That's how he strengthens us, is by our studying, increasing in our knowledge, increasing in our faith. You know, there was something today, and I don't, my memory ain't what it once was, not that it was ever great. There was something today I was thinking about, and it had to do with somebody's name or something, and I couldn't remember the person's name. And it's somebody I knew real well a long time ago, but I can't remember their name because I'm not in a habit of thinking about that person or speaking to that person or being in contact with them. So that information has kind of slipped away from us. And so we've got to be cultivating it. You know, when a farmer plants a field, typically, I know especially when I was growing up, there's no-till kinds of stuff now, and they spray and this and that. They don't have to do as much weeding. But when I was a kid, we put the garden out. Then we went back through with a grubbing hoe and chopped the weeds and done things like that. Dave would run through the middles with the tractor, with the cultivator. We had to cultivate the garden. We had to work the soil. And if we didn't do that work, I remember when me and Tina first got married, the first place we bought, we had a nice little garden spot, and I bought a tractor, and we got the garden all put out, and then it rained for several weeks in a row. It was really too muddy to do anything. And the next thing I knew, the weeds was taller than me. And they wasn't no fun. I tried to go through the middles with a lawnmower. I mean, I hadn't cultivated the garden. I hadn't taken care of it. So my garden didn't do so much growing the plants that I wanted, but the weeds did that I didn't need. And so we've got to be cultivating ourselves. We've got to be working at it. We can't make excuses for not doing it. You know, me and Tina was talking about something on the way to church tonight, and about people that I think have got the idea that when they stand before God in judgment, there's going to be a discussion about our merits and our virtues and what we did or didn't do, and that we can make excuses to God. Well, I don't think it's going to be that way. God's looking at what we're doing now. There's not going to be no debate in this subject when we get to judgment. Our fate's sealed. If we haven't been fully pleasing to him while we're here, then we're in trouble when we get there. And so we've got to be fruitful in every good work. We've got to be increasing in knowledge, because that knowledge, that as we increase in it, it makes us stronger as Christians. You know, we think about it, when we first become Christians, we probably couldn't have had no long debate with a denominational preacher and had a great discussion with them about the merits of our points of view and our understanding of the Word as compared to their false doctrines. We were too young. We hadn't matured. We hadn't grown enough. But as we get more knowledge, we become stronger in the Word, and we can do things like that. And we should at some point get to a point that we shouldn't be afraid to have a discussion with anybody about any Bible subject. Some subjects we're probably going to be better on than others in the Bible, but we ought to be able to have a decent discussion at some point in our life with most anybody about any Bible subject, because we've grown in our knowledge, we've become strengthened, we're stronger as Christians. So that needs to be our goal, that we don't have to be afraid to discuss things. If somebody wants to have a Bible study, okay, we'll have a Bible study. Now, you may ask me a question tonight that I really don't have a good answer for you tonight. But I should be able to, the next time I see you, come back with a good answer. I should be able to go home and figure it out and say, okay, here's the answer as I understand it. When I'm teaching the high school class downstairs, that's one of the things I've told the students. Any Bible question, any class is fair game. Because if it's something they've got a curiosity or want some knowledge about, then I need to be able to give them an answer. And it's not that I have all the answers, because there's been a time or two that they asked a question and I didn't feel like I gave them an adequate answer. But the next class we came to, I was able to give them a good one. I can find it out. So we need to be stronger. We need to be able to look back and say, I'm stronger than I was last year because I've studied, I've learned more, I've increased in that knowledge as he's talking about here, and I've gotten better. And this says, strength with all might according to his glorious power. So this isn't about our might. It isn't about my strength or saying, look what I know, how smart I am, or anything like that, or praising myself. But it's got to do with God's power, the power of Jesus. We should be edifying and praising him. We're doing these things for his glory, not ours. It's not my power that makes me stronger as a Christian, but it's his. It's the knowledge that he's given to us through the Bible, through his revealed word. And so we're going to be strengthened with all might according to his glorious power, because his power was what caused this word to be revealed to us. He gave the Bible, and we read about it, Jesus said he was getting his information from the Father, and he was going to send the Spirit, and the Spirit was going to get his information from Jesus and reveal it to us. And that's what we have here in the New Testament, the Old Testament, the Bible that we have put together for us here. And it was done through his power, not ours, not through some brilliance of some man that did it, but it was done through his glorious power, his great might, that he was able to do that. And it says it's for all patience and long-suffering with joy. We have to be patient about a lot of things in our life. And we have to be patient with our growth and learning. We have to be patient and long-suffering with other people in their growth. Because quite often we'll teach a class or we'll teach somebody they've got a question about the Bible, and we'll sit down and study with them, and we think we've done a fabulous job of explaining it, and they've got, when we get through with the study, we think, okay, they've got it. This is all figured out. And then they go do the exact opposite. And we get frustrated about it. We want to walk up and slap them around some, didn't you get what I had to say? What part of this didn't you understand? Well, this is telling us there's patience and long-suffering involved there. As we're teaching other people, we've got to be patient with them. We can't just expect to explain something necessarily one time and they've got it. We might think we've done a fabulous job of explaining. Maybe we didn't do such a good job of explaining. Sometimes we've got to do, when we think about teaching somebody, we've got to do a little research about who we're teaching and try to understand them so we can present things in a way that they can understand it. Because everybody doesn't understand everything the same. I remember when I was in algebra class back 3,000 years ago, the algebra teacher, she'd go through and she'd write this problem out on the board, and I'd think, oh, I got that. And then she'd explain it a different way, and I'd think, I'm confused now. Then she'd maybe go a third way. There was different ways to solve that same problem. And before she's done, she had me terribly confused. I didn't do all that good in algebra either. But anyway, so we've got to understand how people are. We've got maybe do a little bit background on the people that we're working with to understand their perceptions and where they're coming from so that we can explain things in a way that helps them. And to do that means that we're going to have patience and long-suffering. And when we have that patience and long-suffering, it says with joy. We ought to be joyful that we have an opportunity to teach people, that we have an opportunity to study with people. That ought to bring us joy. It apparently brought Jesus joy. It says he came here and was glad to be able to teach us, so it brought him joy. Paul talking about having joy here, as we're going over in the lesson further, in verse 24, he says, I now rejoice in my sufferings for you. So this process of his living his life, his walk with God, and following Jesus, it brought him joy, and we ought to be joyful about it too. I know these people I've known before that, it's time to go to church. I got to go. Well, if we're looking at it with the attitude of I got to go, you might as well stay home because you're not getting nothing out of it. Your attitude's not right. We ought to be happy to be healed. David talked about it brought him joy. He was happy when they said it was time to go worship God. And that should be our attitude. When we're having this patience and long-suffering with people, when we're studying with people, when we're growing, when we're doing what God's told us to do, it ought to bring us joy. It ought to bring us joy because, for one thing, if we're living proper Christian lives, we're going to avoid a lot of the troubles that other people in the world are having. Some of the guys I work with, they apparently have lived and are living pretty immoral lives, and they've got all sorts of troubles that I don't have to worry about because I'm not living the same lifestyle as they are. God has given us a better way, so I don't have to worry about that. If morally we're living pure lives, I don't have to worry about getting AIDS or any other kind of sexual transmitted disease. I don't have to worry about that. That's not something I got to deal with. If I'm obeying the traffic laws, I have a whole lot lower chance of being in a car wreck. So if I'm following the laws of the land as God has told me to, there's lots of things I don't have to deal with. If I'm paying my taxes like I'm supposed to, I don't have to worry about getting calls from the IRS saying, hey, you messed up, we're coming to see you, we'll bring the handcuffs with us. I don't have to worry about that because I'm doing what I'm supposed to do. And so, and that should bring us joy, knowing that God has given us a better way to live. We can live a joyful life knowing we don't have probably at least half of the headaches that people of the world have. Half of the problems they have, we don't have to worry about because we can have joy. But through this patience and long-suffering, we can have joy.
Mom,
Yes, sir.
do you think that he's tying patience and my version says steadfastness.
Okay.
Do you think he's tying that to the knowledge of God? Because, you think about it. the people that are constantly increasing their knowledge and practicing what they believe are going to be more patient. You know, I mean, you think about these people that have to, you know, back in the first century, even probably even today, that endure torture, you know, for their faith. I mean, the people that really put a lot of effort into it and really studying and really, you know, wanting to be a Christian, they're the ones that are going to endure that torture or whatever. You know, they're going to be patient versus somebody that just says, yeah, I'm a Christian, but when it gets to that, you know, I'm giving it up. I'm giving up the ship because I can't deal with all that torture. I can't deal with all that, you know.
I think that's where the long-suffering or the steadfastness, as your translation said. It's not that we're just doing this when it's easy. We're long-suffering or we're steadfast. Sometimes the walk is more difficult. You know, when we think about if we're walking down or driving down the road or something, sometimes we got to go up hills, and the hills ain't as easy to get up as the downhills are. I remember back when I was more athletically inclined and ran cross country and track. And cross country, some of the race courses we raced on had a lot of hills. The hills wasn't so easy as the downhills was, so we had to be steadfast and keep going. And so I think that's part of the process he's talking to us about here. James?
The English Standard Version ties in the joy with patience, and I think it does go back to long suffering, at least in that context. These people are told to be patient and joyous in the midst of their long suffering or suffering. So we see not only we're supposed to have an attitude, we can endure the suffering, but we have an attitude in the midst of it that is foreign to anybody who's gone through suffering. We can still have joy in the midst of suffering, which is something that's foreign to anybody without God. In doing right, if you just like the apostles did, when they were beaten, they rejoiced in their suffering in that way. And we can do that only because of the wonderful things that God's done for us, and then that will give us a thankful heart in the next part of the verse.
You know, as we think of that joy and our long suffering, our steadfastness, our walk with God is not a sprint. We're not going to just have a real quick, fast burst and be done. But this is more of a marathon type thing. It's a lifelong commitment. It's not a, I'm going to go out and run 100 yards and be done commitment, but I'm going to be running my whole life. I'm going to be constantly, and as Wade's translation said, steadfast. That idea of steadfast, to me, carries with the idea that I'm going to be consistent, I'm going to be regular, I'm going to be dependable. You know, if you see me out in town, you should be able to depend on me to know when you see me that I'm going to be doing what's right. I'm going to be behaving myself. I'm going to be living the way I should. You shouldn't be no wondering about it. And we should be able to depend on each other for that, to know that we've got somebody that maybe is going through tougher times than us, and so we can watch them and see how they get through this, and that'll help us. And so I think, as we've been talking, that steadfastness, that patience, you know, we got to be patient. You know, for most of us, life is going to last a long time. So we've got to be patient and long-suffering or steadfast to get through this. It's not a sprint, but it's not a short race, but it's a lifetime commitment. And we need to understand that. And as we was talking about that with joy, when things aren't going well, we can have joy knowing that sooner or later, I'm not going to be on this earth anymore. And if I've lived right and done the works that he's talking about here, I've grown in knowledge and all these things that we're talking about tonight, I'm going to have that home in heaven. And that should give us a lot of joy. And I think that's something that's in some ways beyond our ability to grasp, is because in our lives we've constantly, more or less, got aches and pains, difficulties, heartaches, and all these things. And we really don't know how to exist without that. I mean, that's just been our constant thing. From the time we're born, we've got something. You know, the little baby, you think, oh, what difficulties does a little baby have? Well, he gets hungry and he screams his head off. Or he messes his diaper and he screams his head off. I mean, he's constantly screaming about something requiring constant attention. So even the little people has got difficulties in their life they have to learn to deal with, and we do too. But if we're being faithful Christians, we've got this joy that it's talking about here, that it really doesn't matter what the difficulties are right now, because we got something better coming. All we got to do is be faithful to death. And we can say that it sounds simple, and ultimately it is. Just do what's right. It kind of reminds me of years ago, there was these ad commercials talking about drugs, and Nancy Reagan, her little slogan, motto, whatever, was just say no. Well, that's what we got to do to sin, is just say no. And you say, well, Monty, it's not that simple. Well, ultimately, really and truly it is. What makes it not simple is because we really want to do the things that we're having to say no to. Because if we didn't want to do them, if there wasn't something pleasurable or something nice or something to be desired or gained by it, then it wouldn't be a temptation to us. But the hard part, and the Bible tells us this, is we've got to get our desires out of the way, and we've got to conform our desires to God's desires. And we've got to learn to think and be like Him, and then we can just say no. Because ultimately, that's what Jesus did when the devil was tempted Him after He fasted for 40 days. He just said no. Now, He quoted Scripture. He had the right attitude about it. It wasn't, man, I really want to turn them rocks into bread. And if Jesus had been fasting 40 days, He wanted them rocks into bread. So that would have been something desirable for Him. He wanted food. He needed food. Because going 40 days, he was at a point, his body was undergoing some really serious trauma fasting that long. So he needed food. But he overcame that temptation to do it the way the devil told him to do it. And so because he just said no, because he knew what the joy was. If he'd have given in and sinned, I'm under the impression he probably wouldn't have got to go back to heaven. And he couldn't have had that joy of knowing He would be our sinless sacrifice and saving us. And so because He was able to say no, we know that we can say no if we will. Because Jesus' goal and desire was to be pleasing to the Father. He wanted to do what God wanted Him to do. That was His goal, that was His desire, and that should be our goal and desire. And if it is our goal and desire and our passion, if we're passionate about that, then that makes it easier to say no, to sin and temptation when that comes along. So as we think about these, we've got to be growing in our knowledge, we've got to be increasing in our knowledge, we've got to be fruitful in every good work, we've got to be fully pleasing to God. And if we can do that, then we can have that home in heaven, and that should be our goal. That should be the most important thing to us. And if that's our goal and the most important thing to us, then these other things, it's easier to put them aside. Because it's, well, this might be interesting or fun to have, but it's not important enough to give up this. And that needs to be the way we look at it. Any questions or comments on verses 9, 10, and 11?
Saying that, you have knowledge, that when you use that knowledge, put it to use, you gain wisdom. Mm-hmm. So, if many times, maybe trying to teach someone, I have knowledge, I knew what the Bible said, but a lot of times when you're young, that you start out the wrong way at some point. You maybe say something that you shouldn't have said. So the next time, you come over that situation, you have that knowledge, go a different direction. Mm-hmm. So I don't know if that's it's helpful or not, but that's, someone could read a book on how to fix a transmission in a car, and he could have all the knowledge to know how to do it until he gets his hands in there and he gets that grease and stuff on his hands. He don't know that he don't have the wisdom.
As Gordon's talking about the wisdom, and basically a lot of that, he's saying it comes with experience, and that's true. And you can think of it as something we might relate to, like feeding the cows. The cows like the feed we're going to feed them. They want the feed we're going to feed them. And we can take the bag of feed out there and slap them in the head with the bag. Well, they got the feed, but that ain't the way they want it. And we didn't present it in a way that was palatable to them. But if we'll pour it out, open the bag and pour it out in the trough in a more gentle way, then they'll come and eat it, and they're happy to get it. And so it's the same way as Gordon's talking about our wisdom. When we're younger, we don't have that much of it. We don't have that much skill in presentation. And sometimes we don't present the knowledge that we have in a way that people can accept it. And so we've got to learn as we grow how to present the information that we have in a way that people can use it. Just like we got to give the food to the cows in a way that they can use it, we got to present God's Word to people in a way that we can use it. And I've heard kind of referred to before as slapping somebody in the head with the Bible. Well, all the information's there. We can whack them with it, but that don't get the information in their head. That's not presenting it to them in a way that they can use it. Sometimes maybe walking up to somebody, well, you believe such and such, that ain't what the Bible teaches, you're going to hell. Well, that's probably going to turn them off or make them defensive when we really ought to be walking it and presenting it in a way, well, I don't understand that the same way as you do. Why don't we sit down and study about it and see if we can't figure out what the Bible really says. The point's the same either way. One or both of us is wrong, but we got to present it in a way, and that's part of having wisdom here with the knowledge, is we can have all the knowledge in the world, but we got to have wisdom to know how to properly use it. Okay. When we've got all this that we've been talking about, verse 12 says, giving thanks to the Father who has qualified us to be partakers of the inheritance of the saints in light. He has delivered us from the power of darkness and conveyed us into the kingdom of the Son of His love, in whom we have redemption through His blood, the forgiveness of sins. So as we go through here and we've grown in knowledge, we're being fruitful in every good work, we're increasing in our knowledge, we're getting stronger as Christians, we're learning patience and long-suffering and steadfastness. And it says, give thanks to the Father who has qualified us to be partakers of the inheritance of the saints of light. So like we was talking about a few minutes ago, we're not going to do enough works to earn our salvation. But God is the one that has qualified us. Now, a lot of people in the world today, a lot of denominations believe kind of the Calvinist doctrine that there's nothing you can do, there's no works you can do, and God picks you and you and you, and He didn't pick that one and that one and that one. The ones He picked is going to heaven, the ones He didn't pick is going to hell, and there ain't nothing you can do about it. Well, that would be, sometimes I think when they read this passage, that's kind of what they get out of it. But how has God qualified us to be partakers of this inheritance? Wade?
It says, giving thanks to the Father who has enabled you to share in the saints.
Mm-hmm.
It seems like it makes a little bit more sense. If God's given me an ability to be able to share in the saints.
To me, as much, a lot of the denominational people I talk about, they talk about that ability. God gave me the ability to believe. God gave me, He done all this. I couldn't have believed if God didn't make it where I could. And I don't think that's necessarily, the ability is the right word maybe, but when He talks about qualified, He's provided us a way that we can be qualified. He's provided the plan of salvation. That's how God qualified us. He's given this information to us. He's given us this information so we can grow in that knowledge and do what He's told us, and by doing that, be qualified. I think we've got to be careful how we say ability. I don't necessarily disagree with what you're saying, but I think we've got to be careful how we say ability, because some people say, oh, I couldn't have believed if God didn't reach down and touch my heart and make it where I could. And I don't think that's what it is. I think all of us can believe because God says He wants everyone to be saved.
You couldn't believe if God hadn't given you the words.
Did we say that again?
You couldn't believe if God hadn't given you the scriptures to be able to believe.
That's what I'm saying. He's provided us a plan and the information to us, but He didn't say you can believe, but you can't. And so I think that's why I'm saying we've got to be careful how we put that, because He's not told some people they can believe and others they can't. He's given us all that ability, and He's given us all the information here. Wade has got the same Bible I do, and I got the same Bible as John does. We might have different translations, but we've got that same information presented to us, and so we've all got to study it. And because God used words, and words have meaning, we can all understand it the same way if we will. James?
Kind of like, when you think of qualifications, you think of a job maybe. So an employer sets a set of qualifications in order to get a position. So God has established the qualifications. He set forth the qualifications and the ability to qualify. Mm-hmm. And if we meet those qualifications, we can share in the inheritance. So there's the Word has provided us with the qualifications for the steps that we must take in order to get the inheritance. And so that's God's part. We just have to follow the steps to salvation.
We've all heard of people that left a will and had some maybe fortune or whatever they've left to certain of their heirs. But the heirs had to meet certain qualifications in order to receive the inheritance. Maybe they had to attain to a certain age. Well, I'm going to leave my son $47 billion, but he don't get it until he's 50, because we want him to learn and mature and be able to spend it right in a way that's not, want to have the maturity not to be destroyed by all that, but to be able to be blessed by it. And so God has set qualifications. He qualified us. He set the qualifications. He's given us the knowledge of what these qualifications are that's written down for us. We ain't got to be wandering around in the dark, wondering, okay, I wonder what I got to do to be right with God. Then we get back to this feeling thing. Well, I feel like if I'd done this or that or the other thing, I'd be right with God. Well, that's not how it works. It's based on knowledge. It's based on intellectual capability. And He's told us what the qualifications are so that we can meet them. John?
Just like 2 Timothy 3:16 tells us the tools that we need to do what we're been asked to do. You know, and it says all Scripture is inspired by God, profitable for teaching, for reproof, for correction, and for training in righteousness. So that we're to be trained in righteousness, to be righteous, to be pleasing to God. This is the tool we can do.
That's our training manual.
You can't do it without.
That's right. Because, you know, if we didn't have the Bible, then we wouldn't be able to be qualified because we wouldn't know what the qualifications are. But because He's given us the Bible, we can be qualified. He's done that for us. He's given us that capability by giving us that information, as we've been talking about. It's based on knowledge. It's not feelings. It's not emotions. It's based on knowledge. Verse 13 said He's delivered us from the power of darkness and conveyed us into the kingdom of the Son of His love. There's a lot of people in the world today that doesn't believe that Jesus' kingdom is established yet. They think He's going to come back at some time in the future and set up His kingdom. And it's going to be based over in Jerusalem, and He's going to set up a new world kingdom and all of that kind of thing that we would hear about with people as we discuss it right now. They say that's not the kingdom. Verse 13 says He's delivered us from the power of darkness. He saved us from our sin. Because it's going to go and talk about in verse 14 we have redemption through His blood and the forgiveness of sins. And it says He's conveyed us, some translations use the words transferred or translated us into the kingdom of the Son of His love. When we become Christian, God adds us to the kingdom. We become members of His kingdom. His kingdom is in existence right now. It has been since the day of Pentecost nearly 2,000 years ago. It's not something we're looking forward to in the future. If we're children of God, we're in His kingdom now. It says here that He's transferred us to it. He has put us in it. So, and He's done that through our knowledge and our obedience and our qualifying ourselves through His plan to be able to have that. So I think this is a very important verse for us to remember as we have discussions with people in the denominational world that believe that the kingdom hadn't been established yet. This says it's there, and that if you're a Christian, if you're a saved person, you're in the kingdom. I don't see, that's one of the things I used to hear the phrase, you have to have help to misunderstand that. I just don't see how we could misunderstand that if we've got open minds and we're looking to see what it says, the words that He used. It says, conveyed us into the kingdom of the Son of His love, in whom we have redemption through His blood, the forgiveness of sins. And as we was talking a few minutes ago, when we made that first sin, we didn't have the ability to fix that problem we had. We didn't have the ability to save ourselves. We didn't have the ability to redeem ourselves or buy us back. But it says we have that through Jesus, through His blood. And we think about that, you know, that's a really incredible thing. For one thing, that the value and the power of Jesus' blood was so great that because He shed His blood, and I mean, we think physically there's only a limited amount of blood we got in our body, but His was so valuable and powerful that it was able to buy back everybody in the whole world that would follow His plan of salvation. From the beginning of time to the end of time, His sacrifice was so valuable that He could redeem us all. He could buy us all back. And so, when we think about it, for some of us, the amount of sins and the grievousness of the sins that we've done in the past, we would think, how could God ever forgive me for all that? The power of Jesus' blood was strong enough to get us forgiveness and redemption no matter what we had done, no matter how often we had done it. He was able to save us from that. And so we need to really appreciate that, and that ought to be one of those things that brings us joy. To know that no matter what we've done, if we'll be obedient, God will forgive us, and Jesus has secured that for us. Thank you for your help and attention in the class.